There's a very touching and unique ghost story that never fails to bring a smile to my face. It's a story called Laugh Track by Harlan Ellison, and it can be found in his collection Angry Candy, a collection published in 1988, written following a period when many of Ellison's close friends were all starting to die. For various reasons, mostly just the passage of time. We'll unfortunately hit a certain point in our lives if you live long enough where your friends will start to pass away. It's a sad fact of reality, but the effect it had on Ellison was very profound, particularly because of the fact that all of these people were passing away in a very small period of time. Basically, you'd go to one funeral and a month later you hear that another close friend or treasured acquaintance had died, either from cancer, heart attack, so on and so forth. Ellison himself wrote about the collection, but even though I thought during the recent years in which I've written these 17 works that they were about the things I've usually worried and chewed and tried to understand, the nature of courage, the parameters of genuine friendship, what it takes to be strong in a world that prefers we be weak and frightened, when I looked over the totality here assembled, the unifying thread was the end of life, personal and universal. And that is wonderfully summed up in the story Laugh Track. Really encapsulates the anger over having lost someone as well as the beauty of having known them. Now, we can't talk about this without first talking about a piece of technology called the Laugh Box. The concept of a laugh track is pretty well known to most people who have watched sufficient amounts of television. It's sort of a universal concept now, but didn't always exist, obviously. So, where does the laugh track come from? Well, for that we have to go back to the days of radio. There used to be a program called the Bing Crosby radio show. And on that program, one day they had a comedian named Bob Burns. And he did a series of stories, farm stories, that were getting huge, raucous laughter. However, given the era, they were considered too racy and a little too blue for popular consumption. So the show erred on the side of caution, decided to cut his segment. The laughs were so big that a guy named Bill Murrow said, let's hang on to the laughs. And then later, when Bill was working on another program, they weren't getting the chuckles, and he decided, let's insert the laughs from Bob Burns' set into this, and thus was the beginning of the laugh track. It began to evolve as time went by, as the medium of television evolved. Initially, television shows were filmed with one camera, and that camera was responsible for recording everything from all different angles. That meant, even though there was a live audience, they would have to watch take after take after take. So, camera angled one way, then the camera goes to a different angle, and they do the same scene again. The problem with this is that when they start to edit the show together, the laughs no longer sync up. They're inconsistent. People aren't laughing as much by the third take. Sometimes they're laughing too soon because they already know the punchline. And sometimes it's just not flowing together. It just doesn't sync up. So what did they do? Well, a guy named Charlie Douglas, who was aware of this problem and very irritated by it, he decided he would begin a process of what he called sweetening. And that was the term that eventually stuck. It's called sweetening when you add a laugh track to a program. Now, the first device that he developed for this was using reel-to-reel audio. But then he developed a machine that he called the Audience Response Duplicator. It was a series of buttons that activated somewhere around 10 audio reels inside with different laughs on them. And you could press these different buttons and play them simultaneously, individually. And you used a pedal. And the longer you held the pedal, the longer they played back. And they would play on a loop, so it would be a constant laugh, or you could click it real quick and the person would laugh very short and punctuated. However, despite his phenomenally boring name, the Audience Response Duplicator, it became known in the industry as the Laugh Box. Realizing the potential of it and seeing its success, people wanted access to this thing. Charlie Douglas kept the designs for it a secret. He kept it in-house, he kept it to himself, so that nobody else had access to it. And this thing became so sought out that he was getting paid $100 a pop to use it. And we're talking back in the 40s and 50s. This was a significant amount of money. And to the point where he was getting scheduled to apply the Laugh Box to about 100 hours of television a week. Charlie's got the monopoly on this thing, and he's king of using it. Now, it's important to know this device because it plays into the short story Laugh Track by Harlan Ellison. Harlan Ellison, just a little quick background on him. He is, as far as I'm concerned, an American treasure, a master writer, especially in the field of science fiction, and a wonderful curmudgeon. He's known for being a very salty, blunt, and brash individual. Ellison worked in television for a long time. He sold scripts to programs like The Outer Limits, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., Alfred Hitchcock Hour, most notably Star Trek. In fact, he wrote The City on the Edge of Forever, which many people consider to be the best, or at least one of the best episodes of classic Star Trek. This is the episode where Dr. McCoy goes nuts and travels back in time to Depression-era United States. Kirk and Spock have to go back to retrieve him. However, Kirk falls in love with a young lady in the past. Spock informs him, we have to let this woman die, because she's going to die very soon in a tragic accident. If you save her life, it will change the course of history, and billions of people will die. So they have to wrestle with that whole conundrum and watch this sweet, innocent woman get murdered by a truck. So they let that happen because otherwise billions of people will die, you know. Most people would just sit back and say, hey, yeah, I wrote that. It was fantastic. Ellison, because he's such a brash curmudgeon, he is not thrilled with how the episode turned out. See, Roddenberry didn't like the original draft that Harlan Ellison wrote. In his original variation, there's a secret drug dealer running a shadowy business on board the Enterprise. There are space pirates. And when the crucial moment comes, when whether or not to let the young woman die, tragically, Kirk tries to save her life. It's Spock who has to intervene and be like, no, fuck off. You're thinking with your dick. He didn't get along with Roddenberry because of that. Roddenberry was always changing his stories because Ellison had a darker view of humanity than Roddenberry wanted expressed on the show. Side note, Harlan Ellison was hired to work for Disney and was fired in one day because Roy Disney overheard him joking with people, saying that he planned to write a porno script involving Disney characters and try to get them to make it. So I think that sort of sums up who he is. My favorite little addendum, Harlan Ellison successfully sued the shit out of James Cameron for stealing concepts that were used in Terminator. There are elements of the story and even scenes within it that are blatant ripoffs of work done by Harlan Ellison. So anyway, Harlan Ellison doesn't fear anybody, and he comes at everyone. Something to keep in mind. Ellison worked in television for a long period of time, so he was definitely aware of the laugh box. The laugh box was a taboo subject. Nobody really brought it up. Nobody wanted to talk about it because they didn't want people to know they were doing this thing called sweetening. And even though it's now sort of an open secret, certain practitioners, certain producers, like Chuck Lorre, they still try to insinuate that they don't use sweetening. Chuck, by the way, has produced such phenomenal shit piles as The Big Bang Theory and 2.5 Men. And if you watch those shows and you think to yourself, that's not a laugh track, I would really love to see the audience of lobotomized dimwits that they are pushing in there and pumping full of nitrous and meth in order to get them to laugh at the shit that is being portrayed on those programs. But anyway, back to Harlan Ellison. So he writes this wonderful story called Laugh Track, which is about a woman named Aunt Babe. It's told specifically from the point of view of an unnamed narrator. We start with as a young boy. And growing up, this young man, he loves his Aunt Babe. She's this wonderful, honey-dripping, beautiful, boisterous woman who has this infectious, melodious, wonderful laugh. She dies when he's very young. He's only just getting to know her, and it's a tragic loss for him because this is a special person. But he always remembers that laugh. And years later, when he's a teenager, he's watching television and he can distinctly hear her laughter on one of the programs. And at first, this confuses him, because he assumes she has to be alive. How could Aunt Babe be laughing on this particular television show when she died years ago and they say that they have a live studio audience? This becomes a bit of a mystery, but also the family sort of dismisses it and they get the boy to sort of doubt his own senses. Years go by. He keeps hearing her laughter on television programs. And as he grows up, he gets involved in television production, still continues to be aware of her presence and starts wondering about it until he discovers the secret. That the laugh box exists, and that most likely what happened is that his Aunt Babe was at a live broadcast of something years ago, years before she died, and her laugh was captured. And because it is so wonderful and because it is so infectious, people have been using it for decades afterwards. This begins to really infuriate the narrator because he knows now that people are intentionally using beloved Aunt Babe's infectious laugh in order to stimulate people around the country to laugh at shitty, mundane jokes. Things that are absolutely not funny, but hearing her tricks people into thinking, maybe that joke was pretty good. And aware of this, he starts to also notice something else. The abundant use of her has sort of produced this effect where she seems to be fading. Her laugh seems to be diminishing, losing that little bit of glimmer that makes it special. It's almost like the life is fading from it. And for a time, he's enjoyed having this laugh there because he was able to treat it as if she was still around. He meets a weird audio engineer who is one of the secret sweeteners, and he shares with him his suspicions about Aunt Babe being on one of these reels. Is there any way to find the original copy of her? Part of this is he's thinking about trying to free her from this hellish nightmare where she's repetitively used like this electric slave to laugh at just shitty material all the time. Eventually, this mysterious individual is able to track down the original audio reel, tape reel, of Aunt Babe's laughter. Then he uses a bit of sci-fi tech mumbo-jumbo and so forth to create a Mobius loop, is the term that they use. And by playing this laugh in a continuous round and round replay, the narrator is able to converse with Aunt Babe. In a sense, her essence has been captured on this audio tape, and they are able to interact with one another. Think of it as her ghost is caught in this audio loop. They're able to talk, and Aunt Babe is finally able to vent her frustrations because she, too, has been pissed off over the last several decades of being forced to laugh at absolute shit television. But now that she's aware of her state, now that her consciousness, so to speak, has been reconstituted, she escapes. And the studio begins to have a very significant problem. Whenever they insert a laugh track, somehow it always ends up, even though no one seems to be putting it in on purpose, they can't track down its origin, no matter what. Whenever a laugh track goes off for an unfunny joke, this wonderful Italian New York woman screams out over the laugh track, "That joke was terrible. Why are you laughing? You know it's not funny. Let them know you think this is a bunch of crap." So her ghost finally gets revenge and is able to just ruin several television shows that are just mediocre garbage that have been thriving thanks to the fact that they can use her infectious laughter to trick the audience into thinking that there's actually some quality comedy going on. And in a way, it could be said that Aunt Babe then gets the last laugh.